Pittsburgh Steelers fans, welcome to this week's episode of Steelers Touch Down Under. I'm Matt Peverell, joined by a new special co-host for this week with Marky D out with a sore throat. Big bro Sco, Rich Schofield. How you doing? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. I was wondering if I should do my accent for the whole show or not.
Well, we'll give you a chance to try it on.
Yeah,
I'll leave it up to you.
I couldn't carry that on for a whole show. But hey, Happy New Year to you. As you put us yesterday in the future, seeing how you were already on to your second day of the new year.
That's right.
I'm guessing things were great for the new year down in Australia.
Yeah, they were. It's been quite cool here and raining for the past 6 weeks, more than what's expected. But we've now started to get some really good weather in, and it's a bit more traditional Australian weather at the moment, a bit hotter and beach weather, and that's what we like here down under. But yeah, 2022 is off to a good start. It's day 2, but yeah, always live in the future, and it's exciting. Obviously, the Monday night game, so we've got that Tuesday lunchtime, and most people are still off for the holidays. So for Australian Steeler fans, it's going to be a good day to go out and be able to watch the game. So yeah, but happy New Year to you, Rich, and to your family, and hopefully the Steelers can kick off 2022 with a good victory this week against the Cleveland Browns.
Well, what team better to kick the year off against than the Cleveland Browns?
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. You know, there's different ways you can look at that. A, it's the Cleveland Browns. Yes, there's always that rivalry there. But 2, the Cleveland Browns, I think, have been, a lot of people this year. I know we have a lot of Steeler fans that say the Steelers have been a little bit of a disappointment. And folks are allowed to feel that is the case. But I would have to say there are a lot of Cleveland fans that feel the Browns have been an even bigger disappointment. So,
well, that's right. And I've heard all season from anyone on NFL Network about how good the Browns are, and the Browns are going to make it, and they're going to skip over any hurdle that they have. And where they're sitting right now at 7-8, you're sitting there going, it's probably not going to happen at this point in time, right? And so, I think where we're sitting, we didn't spend the money on the O-line. We didn't have the ability to do that they did. They brought in a lot of good players. They drafted some excellent talent as well. Not to say we didn't, but yeah, when you talk about disappointment, it's definitely one that the Browns are probably feeling. And then, of course, this week we've got the very likely scenario that it's Big Ben's last, at least regular season home game, and that adds further spice, intrigue, and intensity to this week. But Rich, I think you're going to the game. You're going to get a chance to see Big Ben play. What's that going to be like?
Oh, well, of course, it's going to be a blast because I love going to Heinz Field for games. Although I am going to worry a little bit in terms of my usual, I'm afraid. Right now, I'm 3-0 on the season on going to games at Heinz Field. Every game I've gone to so far, the Steelers have won. I'm worried, though, I'm going to be deviated from my normal routine on game day. You were saying it's been a bit cooler than expected and raining in Australia. Well, here in Western Maryland and Western Pennsylvania, we've been a little warmer than usual, but also a lot of rain. I'm having to keep an eye out. Normally, I take the Gateway Clipper over to the game from Station Square. But I'm worried with the river levels that they're going to shut that down for game day tomorrow, which means I'll have to hop the train and go over. And, of course, then it's just like, it's not the same, especially because the last time that happened that the river was high and we had to take the train was the 2017 playoff game, as Kyle sits over and nods at me, against the Jaguars, which didn't turn out so great for the Steelers. But I'm looking forward going to the game. I'm not 100% ready to say for certain that this is Big Ben's last game in Pittsburgh. I look at it and say this could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you made me pick a percentage, I'm going over 50% that it is. Okay. I'm probably 65-70% saying, yep, probably Ben's last game in Pittsburgh.
It's funny. That's interesting. I'm on a 60%. I'm on a 60% right now. I mean, and this is the thing for Steeler fans, and I said it. Mark was doing his show on Steeler Nation Australia and his YouTube during the game last week, and I sort of said, Big Ben we should be so lucky that Big Ben might come back again, and I said it on Twitter as well, and people came at me, and I said, well, hang on a second. He's got the fifth. He's been sacked the fifth most times in the league with 35 sacks this season. He's behind a very inexperienced and fluctuating, O-line. He's got a great defense there coming back next year. They're going to have another set of draft picks. They've got the cap's going to go up by almost $30 million. They're going to have space on top of that. Big Ben may come back. There's probably enough reason for him to want to come back as well. So, but we will see coming out of this game. But, Rich, I heard there was some big bangs in Pittsburgh in the last sort of 24 hours as well. So you might have to dodge some meteors. Am I right?
Yeah. So, caught on the news this morning. There were a lot of reports into 911, especially in the South Hills, talking about these loud booms that were going on. They were able to rule out that there was no thunder or lightning going on in the area. They were able to say, nope, there was no seismic activity going on. Now they just have a most likely was meteor explosion. So I might have to dodge some meteors to get my way into Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think we were joking before we got on air that, it might be some of TJ Watt's long lost relatives, seeing as he's not from this world.
Yeah.
But look, before we crack into a lot of the previewing for this week's game and Big Ben and his competitiveness and where how this Steeler team needs to get with it to get a win this week. Of course, we'll have Sling and the Slang, and excited to do that with Rich as well. It's always good when we can get one of the North American colleagues on. Mark and I always enjoy that, and we can get them, talking through some Aussie slang. But Rich, I know you didn't enjoy talking about it with Dave earlier in the week. Not that you don't like talking about it with Dave, but it's a bit of a sore point for all of us Steeler fans. But any other reflections or takeaways from the Kansas City game now that we're about a week or so on from it?
Well, my only remaining thing to talk about with the Kansas City game is really that, okay, that one's done and behind us. But as Dave and I talked on our show on Tuesday, it's desperation mode now. If the Steelers come out and even begin to play anymore like that slow start, all this, that, forget it. It's done. It is do or die time. And I want to see the Steelers come out and start the next game like, their playoff life depends on it, because really it does. They need to beat the Browns. They need to beat the Ravens, period. So I hope that the Steelers are ready to come out and do that.
Well, that's it. And Mark and I were talking about it a bit last week, and I sort of said that it was going to be key to any victory or even good play in the Kansas City game. But for me, I still sit there, and it's not there's been this storyline all season around the Steelers not playing, putting it all together on offense and defense at times. But for me, it's the complementary side of football. I mean, Boz always ends up, holds up his end of the bargain, and kicks field goals, and from 50 yards plus. And that, I think, could be very essential in this week's game. But we're yet to see a game where even probably, I would almost say for 50% of the game, you're seeing, the defense set the offense up really well, from a field position standpoint, set their special teams up from a return perspective within the other team's half. On the offensive side of the football, they're not getting enough points to allow this defense to go out and make plays. And so for me, I'm just looking for some, more complementary football. It's just been missing this year. And I think when you think back to 2020 and how we got to the 11-0, even though we weren't playing great throughout some of those games, and you think even 2019 and almost getting to, the 8 wins with Mason and Duck, it came down to complementary football, and it's just not been there.
Yeah, it's the defense has to help the offense, and the offense has to help the defense. And last week, the offense did nothing to help the defense. Now, the defense wasn't doing much to help themselves at times, but 1-play drives and 2-play drives, that's not enough from the offense to give your defense the chance to catch their breath and regroup.
Yeah.
So it's got to be better from that standpoint.
Well, and particularly when you start to see some of the injuries, and I know obviously TJ Watt, and I know you yourself and Dave talked about this, on your show, and you don't want to say too much because you don't want the other team knowing where he's injured and what have you. But when you know that in the locker room, and you know that you're, apart from Hayden and Fitzpatrick, he's the difference maker, and probably more important than most of those guys as well. You've got to come together and you've got to step up. And I know it was Christmas, I know it was on the road, but these guys are professional footballers, and it just stands out to me because if we're going to get up this week against the Browns, we're going to get up against the Ravens, and we're going to be able to do something in the playoffs. This complementary football, it's a non-negotiable, really.
Yeah, and to me too, like when the defense does its part, like they did in the Tennessee game. And created a bunch of turnovers. The offense has got to take some of those opportunities and turn them into touchdowns, not field goals. They have to feed off of each other. It's not one, it's not the other. We need our offense to step up and be excited when the defense does their thing, and then the defense to do the same when the offense is able to punch it into the touchdown zone.
It's one of my favorite BTS sayings, the touchdown zone.
The touchdown zone.
I remember where I was when I heard that live. That's hilarious. But look, as the title of the show would suggest, one of the things I really wanted to cover off today, and particularly when I thought that, when I found out you'd be on with me, Rich, as well, I thought this is one that, you'd like to talk about too, and that's Big Ben and his competitiveness. Is there a greater competitor? And, I've not had the privilege of seeing Big Ben live. I think it's quite funny as an international fan. I go over, and the one game I go to see, it's Devlin Duck Hodges and against the Bills. And, you sit there and I'm thinking, you could tell clearly that they needed to put Mason in, and they did the next week. But regardless, I'm never going to, there's a very good likelihood, even, if Big Ben comes back with the way the pandemic's going on, and potentially, I may never see, or I'm very likely never to see Big Ben play in the flesh, and that is what it is, and that's a real shame. But the competitiveness that Big Ben has oozed throughout his career through day one, I mean, you saw it even, when he was in college and what have you, is incredible. And I sort of went ahead and I pulled some stats from this season, which I was inspired by this from something I saw on Twitter, basically saying that Big Ben's, not having the worst year he's ever had. And I just thought 17 seasons, and yes, he's missed, several games through to injury at times and suspensions and what have you. But this season, so I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Rich, because you've seen it in the flesh, and then to see what we're doing this season and how this team really needs to help Big Ben out. But, he's had 20 touchdowns. That's 11th of his 17 seasons, 3,373 yards. Again, that's 11th out of his 17 seasons. He's averaging 240 yards per game, which is, again, 11th out of his 17 seasons, and more yardage per game than the first 5 years of his career. He's had his third lowest year for interceptions, with 8 and 1 at 1.6% of his passes. He's had 164 first downs with 2 games to go, and that's 12th out of 17. So he only needs 11 to get him to about halfway on that list in terms of his career. He's got his 13th best quarterback rating behind a very difficult O-line with 90.2. He's had 5 fourth quarter comebacks, the most in his career, and he's got 40 in his career. He's had 6 game-winning drives, and he's had 52 across his career, but 6 is the most he's ever had in a single season with 2 games to go. He's been sacked 35 times, which is 7th most, and we know Big Ben got brutalized, with sacks early on in his career. Mm-hmm. 7th most completions in his career with 336 so far in the season, but 6th most attempts with 515. 8th in terms of completion percentage in terms of his career, 8 out of 17 with 65.2%. And yes, he's got the third lowest average of his career with only 6.5 yards. But he's working with very short space. He's trying to get Najee involved. I just think about these stats. He's not even having his worst career year.
No, and if you really listen to those stats, as I was listening you go through them, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, so where this really falls for Ben is a kind of middle of the road year.
Yeah.
Well, personally, at 39 years old, I'd take a middle of the road career of Ben Roethlisberger. But I think it goes to the point you were saying about his competitiveness. I think part of this just goes to show that. I mean, Ben, he plays to win. He wants to win. He wants the Steelers to do really well. I think Ben is slowly learned. I think Ben has learned a lot as he's gotten older, and I think he's learned a lot about what he can and can't do physically anymore. Okay. If I were to take somebody who's seen Big Ben play over a span of years, especially live, Ben would tell you the thing that he's not as good at doing now that he was 5 and 6 years ago, and especially early in his career, Ben was great at shrugging off tacklers, getting free, and still being able to throw the ball down the field. And he has still done that at times this year. You've seen him duck and get away and throw the ball. But he's not able to do it. I don't want to say at the same level, but with the same, like as many times a game as he used to. I mean, it was nothing to see, especially in those years where he was taking all those sacks because the line was so terrible and we're still trying to push the ball down the field. He was back there, shrugging off tacklers to get those balls down the field. He's not going to be good for 8 or 10 of those a game anymore. He might be able to get you 2. And I'd say that's the biggest difference in Ben's game. It's just, I mean, he's a 39-year-old quarterback with a lot of wear on the tread. So, that's got to be expected.
And you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there for me, because one of the things that I wanted to bring up kind of next, and it's great we're on the same page on this one, is you hear that sort of sentiment go around a lot that a team will have, and it's more on the offensive side of football. There's 8 to 10 plays that change the game, or 8 to 10 opportunities where you can score touchdowns. You can get, a massive field changing, play, whether it's in the run or the passing game, and it's often the passing game. And it's like what you said there with the shrugging off at the plays. I just think when you get a veteran quarterback, the amount of those opportunities, it changes, because they do, struggle to move as much around in the pocket. They can't run, necessarily away from those oncoming pass rushes in the same way that they could before. And Big Ben's, case holding them off. And so it goes back to what I was sort of saying earlier about complementary football. There's probably 4 to 6 times for Ben where there might be 8 to 10 for a Justin Herbert or a player like that, or a Patrick Mahomes. And that's where it goes back to when I think about, and what I found really jarring against Kansas City was the drops. Big Ben, the team has to lift to make it easier for him. The team, when those 4 to 6 opportunities come in the game, we saw it, at different times, earlier on in the season with some of the wide receivers, and I think Claypool particularly. We've got to hit them. And at the same time, Big Ben's got to hit them too. I mean, there's that pass to Deontay, against Green Bay. But I just think going into this game, everyone has to sit in that locker room and think, how do we lift? How can we match Big Ben's competitiveness? Because Big Ben is still competing. And you can tell it's not just something that he says in the press conference, about wanting to do well, about thinking he's still got it and focusing on each game as it comes. He's literally doing it. And until I saw what I saw about I actually compared Ben's performance this season to his 2 worst seasons. But then when I went through those numbers and I thought, mate, he's having, as you said before, Rich, he's sort of, it's a halfway year for Ben, in terms of his career. That's incredible behind this O-line at 39 years old. I mean, it's just something that Steelers fans, we could be in for a tough ride over the next, 3 to 5 seasons. And, don't wish Big Ben away, because these stats are hard to replicate.
It is. For me, it's then as Steeler fans, are we, do we take Ben for granted? Do we?
We do.
17 years of Big Ben Roethlisberger, have we kind of taken him and his play for granted? I think there's times where we do. There's a lot of argument out there that maybe we should have moved on from Ben this year and given the ball over to Mason Rudolph or Dwayne Haskins or somebody. And you know what? The Steelers could have done that. But should we really be that upset with the play we've gotten from Ben Roethlisberger behind this offensive line? I'm not.
I'm not either. I mean, and I think you're right there on the taking it for granted, because I think I caught myself about 8 weeks in the last season thinking about that myself. And I sat there and I thought, hang on a second. And even last year with the O-line and what it was going through, it wasn't certainly, rock solid going through toward the end of the year. There was quite a bit of, influx there, particularly and where it was going with Pouncey, and Hassenauer coming in, and there are a few other different changes in that O-line as well. And Villanueva was, depending on whether you look at the PFF score or you look at the play, he was having an interesting year as well. In the right tackle position, and you had Banner out the whole year and what have you. But you're exactly right there, is that, I do think Steelers fans, take Big Ben for granted a lot of the time. And it's that classic, you don't know what you've got until it's gone in many ways. And, you even look at about this week and you think about Baker Mayfield. I mean, this is a guy that's got on the season, his pass completion rate, 62.4%. He's throwing 15 TDs, 11, interceptions. He's got 2,800 yards. I mean, this is a guy that's meant to be in his prime, that's fighting for, his first big payday. And look at where Big Ben's sitting with his 20 TDs, 8 interceptions, 3,300 plus yards. I mean, he's 39 years old, not 26 or whatever that Baker Mayfield is. I mean...
Well, since you brought Baker Mayfield up, I will honor Brian Anthony Davis here on the show and just first bring up that Baker Mayfield sucks. And then I'm going to turn around on Monday and pray for another 4 interception night from Baker Mayfield. So
that's it. I mean, if it's Brown, flush it down. But I looked at that game. I was watching the second half of that game, against Green Bay. The guy was cutting up Christmas leftovers, actually, from the next day on our Boxing Day. But I was watching that game, and Green Bay completely let them back in. That scoreline absolutely flattered the Browns. But what I did notice out of that game that I think that the Steelers need to be really careful about this week is, let's say the Steelers get off to a good start. We know that's been rare so far, right? So a bit of wishful thinking on my part there. But let's say they get off to a good start, or they have a great second quarter and they come out of halftime, looking good. They have to play right through. We are not good enough to let this team, come back in this game. They need to hold them out.
Yeah, with the way the Steelers team has looked all season, I would hate for them to get out to at some point in the second or third quarter, out to a 10-point lead and see them take their foot off the gas. This team for the Steelers is not this team for the Steelers is not good enough this year to, against a decent team, which the Browns to me are a decent team. They are not good enough to be able to be up 10 into the third quarter and take their foot off the gas and hope to make it to the end and win. If the Steelers take that attitude, they will lose.
Well, and you're exactly right there. And the Browns are a decent team. I mean, not just from the roster, but, we've lost to teams with similar records like the Vikings. I think the Chargers are only sitting a couple of games away from that. The Broncos I think have got the same record as Cleveland, and, they've played really well in some games and not so in others. That's why they don't have, a positive win record. But, you're exactly right there. The Steelers are just not good enough. And Mark and I talk about it a lot, and it might be I get told sometimes it's the whole millennial thing and what have you, but Mark and I have been sitting here and we joke about it on this show a lot, which is it's been a while since we've seen the Steelers really, pace someone up, really rack up the scorecard and what have you. And I know that's not Tomlin's style, and it's often not a Pittsburgh sort of style piece, but I just think Big Ben, if it is his last home game, they absolutely need to just put the foot on the gas the whole way.
Oh,
No
yeah.
let up. And particularly this Browns team, what we went through last year in the playoffs, what we went through in 2019 as well. And Rich, even what we've gone through in the last 24 hours, and I think you let me know this morning before we jumped on about some of the comments from Garrett. I'd seen earlier in the week he wanted to make it, he said he wanted to make it Big Ben's last game ever, not even just his last home game. But I think there's been more comments overnight.
Yeah, he and Clowney have kind of been into it. They saying things like they want to send Ben out with a smash and things like that. There's a little bit of smack talk going on there. And I really would have thought after the game near Halloween that Myles Garrett would have maybe learned to just, keep his mouth shut and play, but apparently that doesn't work for him. So I'm really interested to see if maybe some of the talk that's been going on doesn't add a little extra motivation to our offensive line, as they could definitely use some motivation right now.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I also think, in a weird way, it might even inspire, TJ Watt even further. I mean, it's hard to imagine, that guy being, or that bloke being inspired anymore. But, he's got 2 games left. I think it's going to be very hard pressed to match the record, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. And I think, going up against Garrett in this game, it'll be very interesting to see them compete, because, I still find it so interesting when you hear Myles Garrett Defensive Player of the Year, and, the TJ Watt talks finally started to lift over the last 3 or 4 weeks. But gosh, to hear it all season, and, TJ's played 2.5 games, almost 3 games less than Garrett. But Rich, do you see TJ Watt being able to get some sacks? I know you and Dave talked about him being quiet last week and his PFF score and what have you. But
to me, it's really going to depend just on where his health is. If he's feeling good, sure, he is. He'll get in and he'll be putting pressure on Mayfield. But again, we're not going to know exactly where he's standing with his pain level in terms of what was going on with his ribs. Because that's just one of those injuries you have. It's not necessarily ever going to keep you out of a game. You're just not necessarily going to be able to do the things you're used to being able to do on the field. Whether it be you can't do things at the same speed, or you just can't, especially from a pass rusher standpoint, can't use certain moves because it just the pain's too much. I don't know.
I've cracked some ribs before. It's not fun. And I've cracked a sternum too. Actually, I tried to play through that in my final year in high school of, the equivalent to, sort of top tier high school, football in the US. And it's not an easy thing to do. You can't, and I can't even imagine at the pro level, sports medicine and painkillers aside. I mean, that's an incredible thing, particularly when you're going up against, people that are 6'5" and 330 pounds of very, predominantly muscle. It's a very different challenge. But look, Rich, this is about the time usually in the show, and we moved away from the half, the breaks. This is about the time where Mark and I do our sling and the slang segment, which, as we like to say, just as Big Ben likes to sling the rock, we like to sling the slang. And it's we're going to have to probably come up with a new catchphrase if Big Ben's not back, which is because it just doesn't have the same ring to it. So we're going to come up with another phrase next season. But this is where Mark and I usually give, the listeners a word of the week, or we share an anecdote about Australia. But over the last 2 years that we've been with Behind the Steel Curtain, an incredible, coming up on, or I guess it's 2 seasons, but not quite 2 years. When we have our US colleagues on, and I think you and I've been on a show with others before. I think we did some draft shows. I think I've jumped on with you and Dave at times before as well on the Scobro show, which every Tuesday night for everyone if you're new to this show. But we've never done one-on-one. So this is sort of your turn. So what I've got a couple of Australian words for you. So I'll tell you what they are, and then you can have a guess. If you want to give them an attempt, you can. You don't have to. No pressure there. We sometimes, some of our colleagues do all of them. Sometimes they do none. Sometimes they pick one or two, what have you. I've only got about 4.
Okay.
But we'll see how you go. And then if there's anything else Australian that you've got for me or questions you've got for me, we can tackle that too. Now let's kick it off. So the first Aussie slang word for this week is hooroo. Hooroo. What does hooroo mean?
Hooroo. Wow. Oh, boy, I'm thinking that I've heard that somewhere. Sorry, it's funny, we're sitting here talking through this. I've had several Australian students work for me in colleges through the year, and I'm thinking it's the last one that I had when I was at William and Mary that brought that up.
I almost put it in the title of today's show too. I almost did it. I didn't know whether it would work well on the audio side, so I changed it.
You know what? I'm going to say something like the last hurrah.
Yeah, kind of. You say hooroo when you're leaving somewhere, but it's often it's maybe it's just contextualized. Marky D can challenge me on it in the live chat, but you might say it. Let's say there's a family that you don't see a lot. You might see them at Christmas and, Easter or those sorts of times, or infrequently, and you'd be like sort of hooroo. And, it's not necessarily I'll see you later or I'll see you in a while or what have you. I'll see you next week. It's more of just a, sort of a goodbye, but very casual sort of goodbye. Some people might use it more frequently than that, but that's sort of the context that I've had. So for me, I was thinking, Big Ben this week, and as you sort of said there, last hurrah, and you were almost on there, that it's kind of hooroo to Big Ben this week, from Steelers, home fans. Yeah. All right. Well, this one you might know. We've used it before, but there's only so many. Mark and I often joke there's only so many slang words that we can share because a lot of them have some non-PG connotations at times or involve some swearing and what have you. But that's like sort of any slang from any country. But hard yakka. Do you know what hard yakka means?
Let's see. No, but right off the top of my head, I'd want to say it's how you would refer to someone who is a big BSer. Kind of like, gives the Dave answer on things.
No, but I'll compliment Dave and I'll say that he likes some hard yakka. Hard yakka for us is hard work, the tough stuff. And gotcha. Mark and I often talk about it in terms of, the defense and, stop, pound and ground in there in the defensive line. Cameron Hayward, it's hard yakka all day. You see him chasing down players, down into the backfield, and definitely if they've made a break as well. So yeah, that's what hard yakka is for us. So we like, that's what we like to see. So, not afraid of that hard yakka. I mean, the perfect definition of that, I think, over the last 2 years is when Spillane, smashed Derrick Henry. That's some serious hard yakka that game. All right. So I used this recently. I work for an American company, but obviously work out here in, the Asia Pacific region. And I used this term recently, and it just blew them away in terms of context. So I wondered whether you'd guess it, or I thought it would just be one funny to talk about. But the word, legend. And so this isn't a word that you have to guess, but, we talk about, a Pittsburgh legend or someone like that. But I used the word, I just replied in an email to someone when they did something to me, actually kind of saved the day for me on something. I just replied legend. And they sent me back an email with a GIF and a few question marks. And we're like, what does this mean? And I sort of thought, well, it's interesting. In Australia, if someone does something that's really great for us, and Marky D brings up the abbreviation of it, ledge, in the live chat, we'll sometimes call someone a legend. So, it could be, someone, I think you're taking a mate to the game this week. So if you rang him up and said, "Hey, I've got tickets to the Steelers this week. Let's go. Come with me." He'd be like, "Oh, you legend," or he might say, "Oh, you ledge." And so Marky D spelt that like ledge, like a cliff ledge. I've always spelt it, without the E, but it's quite funny that we just say legend in a response back and can be pretty brief to it. And as I say, it always gets, US colleagues on the professional side of things for work for me, they're always a bit like, and questioning. But I wonder, what would you think, Dave, Rich, if I sent you a message just replying legend, full stop?
I'm kind of going along the lines here, a vodka drinker who says savior or hero or a person that saved the day.
Yeah, that's it. All right, so the next one I've got, and Bad absolutely minced this one up when we got him to do it. But Rich, can you tell me what a shark biscuit is?
A shark biscuit.
Shark biscuit.
Wait a minute. Hey, Kyle, what's a shark biscuit?
I have no clue. You might call Kyle a shark biscuit, actually.
Maybe. Oh, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, I'll just go with somebody swimming in the ocean.
That's on. That's absolutely on. It's when when a child swims at the ocean, you can call them a shark biscuit.
Good. Hey, Kyle, I got it right. We got to remember that, and let me call your cousins that when we get to the beach next year, okay? Okay.
And then the other one that came up over New Year, we heard a reference to a long neck. And so Rich, I saw Dave come in the chat. Rich, what's a long neck?
Well, let's see. That may depend on where you're on in the world, but a long neck would be a bottle of beer.
It
is what people around here, a lot of folks around here refer to that. Some people, I've also been places where people refer to a turtleneck shirt as a long neck. But I'm used to it being a bottle of beer.
Okay, so that's what I understood it to be for you guys, and it is for us too. But it seems like they're different lengths. So I think the long neck, when I did a bit of Googling about it, is about 330 mils, which I can't convert that to ounces off the top of my head. But the long neck for us is 750 mils, which is 25 ounces. So we just call a regular beer, beer bottle a beer bottle, or a beer. Whereas our long neck is actually, it's quite a big, it doesn't help on the audio side when I'm gesturing, but it's actually quite a decent sized bottle of beer.
That is interesting. See, you learn something new every day.
Yeah. I always find the measurements quite funny. The height thing works because in sport, even we're in the different system, you sort of work out what the values are, every couple of inches and what have you. But it's very different when you've got ounces and weight and what have you to try and work that out. I'm very good on the pounds and mile conversion. But yeah, it's quite interesting. In fact, one of the ones that I've mentioned before this time last year, I think we were talking to Jeffrey Bennett on it, but we had a track meet when I was 17. We did it. There was a big invitational on the Gold Coast in Australia. My school, traveled interstate to go do that. And then we had a couple of American schools come out. And so we're so used to running the 1500, which is obviously the Olympic event. But as an American, you guys all run the mile when you're developing. And it was just funny. You just saw 1400 meters into this race. We were struggling. And, our US counterparts were just blazing past us because they're used to running an extra, 100 meters on top of us. And it was just so funny in all these distance events, same thing with the 3K runs that we did as well. Again, you got the double mile there. And so just being used to running the extra 200 meters there, it's just so funny to see the difference in how much a metric system doesn't just change the way you measure things, but actually has a physical impact when you go and do something. So it's just quite different.
Always interesting to hear those differences.
That's it. But let's get back. Let's get back to
Steelers.
So, I always like to ask Mark this, and it's interesting some of the players that we come up with. Rich, is there a player on the Steelers that you're looking this week? I mean, it may well be Big Ben, but you just think that if we're going to win this game, this player has to ball out, or this player has to step it up if they're not stepping it up on the season so far.
Well, no, it's not that I'm looking for somebody to step up, but I have a feeling that there's someone who I need to see that if I'm seeing them in certain ways, that it could be a good thing for the Steelers. All right. And believe it or not, I'm going a little bit off of what I've been thinking all day on this, but really it's going to come down to me. I'm going to look at JoeHayden. Okay. This is JoeHayden versus the Browns, his old team, the team that didn't keep him around. I'm looking for JoeHayden interceptions in this game. If JoeHayden could pick off a pass in this game, I think it could be a really, really good sign for the Steelers.
Okay. I like it. Very much like it. For me this week, and I wanted to go someone on the defense, and I think there's still a bit to go in over the next day or so in terms of players coming in and out, and there's players that have been off the injury report, like Dotson and Bush and Wormley and Showdown. I wanted to think about someone in the inside linebacker position, particularly if Devin Bush was playing, but I'm going to go with someone else on the offensive side of the football. For me this week, we know Deontay will want to bounce back after his drops last week. For me, it's Claypool, because when we talked earlier about those 4 to 6 plays or 8 to 10 plays and Big Ben being hold people off, Claypool is going to get some deep balls thrown at him or some intermediate balls. And I know Big Ben's really not like to pass there. And Jeffrey Benedict wrote a great article on that a few weeks back behind stillcurtain.com, your one-stop shop for all things Pittsburgh Steelers. But for me, it's Claypool, because there are going to be some times where it's going to be difference maker. He's got a chance to continue to redeem himself, or let Steelers fans put the Vikings game to one side, the music playing at training to one side. And I just think he could be a real difference maker, particularly with some of the injuries that the Browns have at the moment, or some designated outs. I know they're missing both Ronnie Harrison and John Johnson, the third there, which is incredibly disruptive for their defense as well. But that's going to force some other players to do some different things. I think Delpit's been playing on and off. Newsom's injured. He's a great cornerback there. So as I said, I think he's going to be really, really key, and particularly if Denzel, I don't recall whether Denzel Ward's in or not, but they're going to need someone to leap over the top of people and bring down the tough catches.
All right. Good to hear. Actually, glad we both went one on each side of the ball there.
Yeah, for sure. But then flip it across to the Browns. I hate talking about the Browns too much, but who's the player that the Steelers have to stop on the Browns side?
There's 2 ways you could go on this one, but I'm going to go with this one because I talked about it a little earlier. To me, it's Myles Garrett. Okay, he's the guy that comes out. He's the guy that talks. He's the guy that wants to get after Big Ben. We need to treat him like we did in the first game, where his name was not being mentioned at all. If we can control him to where his name is not being mentioned at all, that will be another good thing for the Steelers offense.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm going to go the other side of the ball then as well. To me, I was sort of thinking Baker, but when we talked about earlier about the 15 touchdowns, the 11 or 12 interceptions, I think he's less of a factor, as long as the Steelers, make the right plays. But I'm sitting there and it comes back to Jarvis Landry, and I just have these memories and these flashbacks to what he did in the divisional game last year and how he carved it up, and the Steelers have to be on, because you saw it, and I know different divisional opponent, but you saw it in the first game we played against Cincinnati. It wasn't that we let Jamar Chase, get plus 100 yards, but he had 2 game-defining touchdowns, particularly when they were in the Steelers' half and made big, a 30-yard plus play. that's what I can see from, Jarvis, Landry, and with our secondary being quite in flux and different people in and out, you only have to have a small lapse, and Jarvis Landry will take it to the house. And Minka has to be on for that, and the team has to be around it, particularly if Minka's flying into the box. So if they can stop, Jarvis Landry, and there's no older Beckham Jr. to even have to consider anymore. I think that will help, because I just don't trust Baker to get it done through the tight ends alone. And I think the Steelers, Terrell Edmonds can, mark up against David Njoku enough, but when it comes to stopping the Browns, I think shut down Jarvis Landry and you shut down Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I can't argue with that one. I know I knew you were going one of two spots. I knew you were either going to go with Landry or Chubb when you said you were going on the offensive side of the ball. I knew it was going to be one of those two, and that's really what you need to do. You're not necessarily going to stop them both, but you have to stop one of them to give yourself any kind of chance to win a game. Would it be nice if we could shut down both? Sure, it would be, but I'm not counting on this Steelers team to shut down both Landry and Chubb. But if you only partially shut down both of them, you're really not helping yourself a whole lot. They need to get one of them to become irrelevant in the game.
That's it. And I think about back to even what yourself and Dave were talking about on your Scobro show last week. Kansas City there were in a situation where it was they could let the Steelers make plays. They could let the Steelers run the ball toward the end of the game. It didn't matter at that point in time. And if we can shut down that pass and we can get out to any sort of lead that's 3+ points, running the football, is only going to take time off the clock on their side of things. So, and I think about this team, and we think about the, the challenges, let's put it positively, that we've had with the interior defensive line. Are we more likely to be able to stop Jarvis Landry, with Hayden and Witherspoon and Fitzpatrick and Sutton, or are we more likely to be able to stop Nick Chubb? I just think, Jarvis Landry is a much easier proposition for them, given what we've seen so far on the season. But before we open up to audience Q&A, and we'd love to have some questions. It's been a bit quiet on the questions side this week. So live chat, feel free to fire away. But Rich, one of the other things that we like to do on this show is, one of the other Aussie slang words is a punt, which doesn't just mean a kick here, doesn't just mean a ferry that goes across a river, but it also is a gamble. So if people are going out gambling, they might say, "I've had a tough day on the punt." But that's sort of our bold predictions. Do you have a bold prediction for this week's game?
My bold prediction for this week's game is going to be the Steelers defense causes 3+ turnovers.
Oh, I like it.
3+ turnovers.
I actually, when you talk about the turnovers, in the article that will go live with all of our predictions of the score across the BTSC network, I put that in there in terms of the Steelers would need to have some defensive scores to break 30 points this week. So I'm looking out for those turnovers that you mentioned there, big time.
Yeah, it would be nice. Three turnovers would be great for the Steelers. One of those resulting in a defensive touchdown would be icing on the cake.
Love it. Love it. From my side of things, I think Najee goes nuts in this game. I think, Big Ben, is able to leverage him in the short passing game. The offensive line creates some holes. They know what it means. We see, I don't know whether he'll necessarily break 100 yards rushing, but I think you're going to see him, probably get 150 between the passing in the passing game and the rushing game and the running game. So that's what I'm excited to see. I don't think he's going to steal the show from Big Ben, but I think he's going to help Big Ben celebrate, one last victory at home, if indeed that's exactly what it is. But we've got a question from Marky D, my usual co-host on the show, and it's directed to you, Big Brosco. Rare that we get a directed question, but there you go. What is your favorite thing to do at Heinz Field? And I'm assuming Mark means behind actually watch the Steelers play.
You know what, Mark? That after a year off of not getting to go to games, What I've found most fun this year has been actually either meeting up with fans of BTSC or getting to talk to other fans at the stadium about BTSC. That has been a lot of fun. I mean, Dave and I talked in our show last week about the Titans game. We had I lost the guy's first name. Rats. He's from Ohio. Anyway, he listens to us on audio, but is never in the live chat. So he's somebody we weren't totally aware of. But he listened and he came in, he found us, and we sat and talked to him for 5-6 minutes, and it was fantastic. That to me is what's really gotten to be fun, is getting to talk to people about BTSC while at the stadium.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Marky D brings up a second question. He says it's directed at me. Matty. He's like, does it feel weird you've been closer to Big Bro Sco and Dave Bro Sco in person than your Aussie mate? Because he and I have struggled with the restrictions that we have here in Australia to meet up. Well, actually, I think the game though that I went to was Big Bro Sco. No, it wasn't Big Bro Sco. It was Dave, and it was bad. I don't know whether you went to that.
I was there. I was there with my daughter.
Okay.
That was the Buffalo game. Yep. Yeah. We were there too.
Yeah. So yeah, Mark, I probably have been, but then I probably have passed you on a highway at different points. So maybe I've been close. I don't know. It depends where we are from the Heinz Field, but that is quite weird, Mark. You're making my my experience at the Bills game even weirder, between not seeing Big Ben and then not catching up with my Australian BTSC colleague and good mate, Marky D. But we will grab that beverage soon, Marky D. Just Me says, any official leaks that Hayden is retiring? I haven't seen anything about that.
No, he's given a few, I don't even want to say hints at things here or there. I think, if you ask me what I think is going through JoeHayden's mind right now, is he's going to play out the rest of this season, play out this contract, see what happens. If things happen and he continues to play, he'll continue to play. If it's his time to walk away, he might walk away. So that's really, in terms of what I've seen kind of hinted from him, has been like, this could be my, he's kind of said, hey, this could be my last, game at Heinz Field. And it could be, but I don't think he's as, I'd put more money on seeing JoeHayden, even if it's not with the Steelers, with somebody in the league next year, than I would Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, I would completely agree, and I think even if the Steelers are bringing back him back in a mentoring role, or another sort of role, and in terms of this back secondary as well. But I watched before the season started, I watched an NFL training video about a bunch of different pros that go out and work out in this camp in LA. And JoeHayden I didn't know Hayden was part of it. It was just an NFL, it was just a conditioning 6-week program they did. And I just wanted to see some of the things and the agility work that they were doing. And Hayden was, running it with the best of him. I actually think Jarvis Landry might have been one of the other players at that camp, funnily enough. But it was just incredible to watch what they were doing, and, the process that he went through to rehab his body and how seriously he takes it as well. He could probably well play. Yes. Do I think he's, lost a bit of speed this season? 100%. But he's still got it in the head, and you can see it in the games. I mean, you don't make the play that he made against the Titans, if you're not up to the standard. But Michael O'Malley says, do you actually think these young cats actually come to fight this week for Ben? Well, we've talked a little bit about that through the show, but Rich, I guess we like to have a saying on this show, money where the mouth is. Do you think the younger Steelers players can come out and help Ben get the win?
They can, but what I think you're really going to start to notice, and this week may be a good place to really get a good litmus test on these guys, is who has the ability to win that fight.
Yeah.
And we're still looking for some of those questions along the offensive line, especially. And see what they're able to do. Does Chase Claypool put some of those things he's gone through this season behind him and come out and just play big time football like we all are pretty confident he can do? I think it's there. The question is just how willing are these guys to do it? I don't know enough about the locker room atmosphere to know how much some of these guys really care about Ben Roethlisberger. Just, I don't know. What we see in this game could end up being very telling, but.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. You know, we all get to speculate, and you know, even ourselves here on BTSC, but at the end of the day, we're fans. We don't know, and the media have no idea. They have probably less idea when you think about when I see what the Steelers come out with in press conferences. They have even less idea probably than we do because of how much we soak up, you know, what the team's doing. But you're exactly right. You know, and it's the classic saying: the proof is in the pudding. They've got to come out and show it. You know.
Yeah.
Steeler Nation 412. You'll have to check out the article unless Rich wants to give his score, but I'll leave my score in the article.
Well, I'm trying to remember what score I gave on Tuesday night with Dave. I think I gave 24-21 Steelers, if I remember correctly.
I think my score is about a 10-point difference, but I just think the Steelers can rock up and do it at home. Kevin asked, what changes will the Steelers make on the offensive line? Look, this is one for the offense, for the off season. But I mean, from my perspective, you know, they're going to need to bring in, you know, definitely depth at different positions. They're going to have to draft, you know, some players as well. But it also depends. Are you bringing back Turner? Do you trust Banner, you know, in his recovery? Can you bring back Chooks on the cheap? I mean, there are a lot of different things, but I think, Rich, for you, what are the things you're thinking about when it comes to the offensive line?
Probably along some of those same lines. Turner and Banner coming back are the first two things I'm really starting to question because, especially with Banner, I know there is some salary cap savings you could get there. It's not a ton, but a little bit. Also would be like, you know, who are you going to go out and get? What kind of money are they looking for? I mean, we've got more money this year. That is the nice thing for the Steelers. They have more money to spend than they've been used to the last 4 or 5 years. The issues a lot of people will say, though, is that there's so many holes in this team and you only have so much money. The Steelers have to decide, really sit down and look and take a good look and decide where do we want to spend it.
That's exactly it. And if you're not, for me as well, if you're going to spend wherever you spend the money in free agency, you're gonna want to or have a bit of faith that you can fill in the other gaps in the draft. And you know they're not two separate things. But at the same time, we know the Steelers like to get some surefire or some players that can work in those positions if they miss out on anyone in the draft and draft best player available. But you know they've got to decide pretty quickly. Are there 5, O linemen outside the top 10 picks that they're happy to draft in the first round? If so, then maybe they spend money elsewhere. When it comes to free agency, I think cornerback's another one of those positions. Do you want to pay a lot of money to get in a veteran or a proven player, or do you want to go in and spend a top round draft pick? And it's so funny. I did it this week on Twitter. You talk about cornerback with the Steelers and a draft pick. Even in our Slack channel, I was talking about it with one of our colleagues, and people go, I don't want this. I don't want to draft a cornerback, but there's some great cornerbacks coming through. So, these are the things to consider, and these are questions that we're going to get to spend a long off season talking about over the next few months.
I will go back to Kevin's question. I will say one thing. To me, there is only one locked in person on the offensive line for next year. And that's Kevin Dotson. He is the guy that I think the Steelers have to keep where they've got him and build around.
Do you think they should switch into right guard, though, if they're going to let Turner go? Like, I just sit there with that one and I wonder.
I think that will come down to what they build in around.
Yeah, okay.
That I think is going to depend on what the rest of the personnel ends up being. I think they'll get the personnel in and then make the decision which side of the line they'd want Dotson on.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to bring up Steeler Nation 412 again, though. He says, should Canada let Ben call the plays? And I'm bringing this up because we've heard a lot about this. Does Big Ben get to call the plays? Do we go back to plays in the dirt style football? Assuming that actually happened last year with Fichtner, which I think it did. But, Rich, what are your thoughts there?
My worry is that if it gets to the point where Ben's doing that, it's because the Steelers are going to be down and trying to scramble back. So I hope they don't.
That's it.
I hope that it's not just let Ben call the plays, because typically that starts to happen when the Steelers are down and needing to press.
Yeah. And this is it. It's like when Big Ben, throws all those yards in the playoff games. Are we seeing? Is that are we going to get the best result out of that? Well, we're already so far down in the game, right? So, it's a bit of a challenge then. Brian Brown brings up. I'm going to skip a few questions, but that we've sort of talked to throughout the show. But Brian Brown says, "Am I the only one who still believes the Steelers can win the Super Bowl?" Rich, do you believe the Steelers? I mean, it's so hard to say when they're playing the way they played against Kansas City.
I just think back to, Ben's first Super Bowl and how that team had to pull it together, and they played their best football the last couple of weeks of the season and then right through the playoffs. Could that happen? There is enough talent on this Steelers team that could happen. I'm not sure there's enough depth on this Steelers team that could happen. But first things first, beat the Browns.
That's it. We can't get ahead of ourselves. Nope. Like, you've got to take it game at a time.
We need to beat the Browns, and then we need to beat the Ravens. And then if that gets us into the playoffs, then it's beat whoever the first team is we play. It's like, just keep trying to win the next game, and let's hope for the best.
Completely agree. And it's also like, I could see this. You look at the games that the Steelers have lost, and it was brought up. I can't remember if it was your show this week. It was one of the other shows, across BTSC network. But the concept of the fact that, I think it was you guys, but that the Steelers have played the top two teams in the AFC 2 weeks in a row in Tennessee and Kansas City. They beat Tennessee at home. They guess that loss was awful at Kansas City, but were they probably going to lose that game? I know you guys had it penciled in as a loss. I had it penciled in as a loss as well. Like, the Steelers and have played some top teams throughout this season as well. They've had the hardest strength of schedule. So if they can make it, to the postseason, you can't count it out, because it's 2 rocks up to play on the day. And that's really, really important. Michael O'Malley asks, why did we leave 10 million on the table? Well, the good news, Michael O'Malley, even if regardless of, there wasn't a lot of great O-linemen there. We didn't know DeCastro was going to go, which, Rich pointed out earlier in the show. But that is all I'll say, is that's, and then Rich, go for it. But there's 10 million on the table for next year now. That can carry over.
Right. But the other piece I think I need to bring up with that is every team out there leaves 10 million, around 10 million, typically somewhere between 8 and 10 on the table going into the season, because anything you need to do to sign a player during the season, you have to have the salary cap space to be able to do it. So I'll even take, for example, this, like, the Steelers just signed Tigray Scales off the Cincinnati practice squad. Okay. His salary that the Steelers will pay this week, and they have to pay it next week, has to come out of remaining salary cap. So there had to be money there to do that. When we got Montavious Adams, we had to have money there to be able to do that in the middle of the season. So for the Steelers, they went into the season, I want to say it was just shy of 10 million. I want to say it was in that 9, 6 or 7 range. We've used some of that. Not a ton, but we've used some of that because we've needed to add pieces as the year went on. Anything not used will roll, like Matty said. But when we go into next season, we will not have taken our salary cap number down to 0. There will be money there to do in-season deals where we need to, depending on, injuries and things like that.
And I think the smallest number that we've had over the last couple of seasons, it might have been, I don't think it was last year, it might have been the year before, was we had 6 million at
6
one
million.
point. And that was considered, I think maybe it was last year. And that was considered, quite small. And I remember there was a few players that were on the risk of being, cut if a major issue happened. I think, it was last season, because we're talking about if Big Ben, had another injury and they couldn't go around with Duck and Mason again and what have you. So, the Steelers, I think if you're sitting here and you're a Steelers fan that feels a bit jaded and jilted by the fact that they've got money in the cap, in a year with a smaller cap, and a year where they've had some injuries in some key areas of this team, offensive line, defensive line, the secondary's been in flux. Think about it, like that 10 million carries over for next year. That 10 million helps us cover, voidable contracts as well. So, this does create some opportunity for us in the different moves that the Steelers can make next year, and, paying people forward, contract restructures and what have you. And there'll be a heap of time for us to go through that. But if you really look at it, and I think the money that you were talking about as well, Rich, before with Zach Banner, I think it's roughly about 2 million or so. But that might be enough. Yeah, that might be enough to retain Chooks, who's a free agent. Like, what's the market going to be for Chooks, right?
Exactly. So there will be a lot to be done. Once the Steelers season ends, I know Dave is ready to hop in and start working cap. But he's kind of like me. Like, we'll look at those kind of things, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's finish the season first, because we got an entire off season to start working on that, on cap and what we think we can and can't do. And
there's always surprise cuts as well, right?
Oh yes.
So
yes.
You can sit there and go, Aaron Rodgers is going to be a free agent. Well, that's great, but there might be a team that makes a bunch of cuts, then they've got the money, right? And there's players probably on this Steelers roster that are sitting there. Like, Tuitt's probably a name that's going to be bandied around a lot, whether he goes or he doesn't, whether he, I saw rumors, is he going to retire, what have you. That, I don't want to also get into that. We need to wrap up the show, but they're the sorts of things to think about. And we're not really going to know until about a week before free agency. And even then, it'll be a couple of days in before you start to see all these moves happen as people become available. Teams can talk to players, all those different things as well. But with that, I'd like to say a big thank you to Big Bro Rich Schofield, for joining me today on Touchdown Under. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really want to do a show with you for a while. Miss Marky D, of course, as well. But we'd love to have you back anytime you want to come on. And I just want to wish you and all of BTSC a very happy New Year.
Thanks so much. Get better, Marky D.
That's it. And Marky D always says, closes out the show with "Go Steelers." So I'll hand that over to you, Rich.
Okay. Oh man, I got to close it with "Go Steelers." Kyle's used to hearing "Can't wait," but I will say,
you can say "Can't wait."
Okay. Okay. Monday, me in the stadium. I will be looking for folks. I already know I got to hit up BF Bud, who's going to be there with in Dave's seats. He and I are going to try to meet up. Someone asked early on if I was going to try to do a live podcast. I doubt it, but I don't know. My friend Tim and I were trying to get to the stadium pretty early that day, even though it's supposed to be freezing cold in Pittsburgh. But we're still going to try to get there early and get around, and I'm hoping to run into some folks. So Monday, Steelers, Browns, Ben's last game potentially in Heinz Field. Can't wait.